Well, just to introduce myself, my name is Darcy Pinasco. I'm with US Bank. I'm a project manager and I work with strategic initiatives on how do we go to market. It's my second day in this role, so it's a pretty long title. I've got the distinct pleasure to moderate this conversation today around commercial real estate. I think it will expand the conversation throughout our discussion, not just in Wisconsin, but maybe a little more throughout the US as we're seeing inflation not just target our local areas, but a little bit everywhere. And maybe, just while we're kind of working on the technology piece, we can go around the room and have everyone else introduce themselves. I think we could start with fearless leader, Heather.
Thank you, Darcy. My name is Heather Ewing. I'm the founder and CEO of Abstract Commercial Real Estate here in downtown Madison. We're a boutique commercial real estate firm focusing on retail and restaurants in the heart of the downtown as well as Dane County. So we're a smaller market, but with that, we really like to bring about curated retail so that you enrich the lives not only of the tenants that are living their dreams and passions, but also the landlords that we represent, and allowing that to really filter through the community. I think it enhances people's lives, allows them to live more richly and experience more. So we do represent tenants, landlords, developers with an emphasis in the mixed use development. So anyone that is familiar with that arena knows that it is unique compared to the smaller properties or the standalones. So it's a pleasure being here, and Darcy, thank you for moderating us.
Absolutely. Next, can we move to Ms. Carol?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. I'm Carol Schaefer. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for Freedy and Associates. We are a general contractor based out of Reedsburg, and I'm in the Madison, Wisconsin office. And we do commercial and multifamily and residential and also pre-engineered metal buildings and a pretty broad array of things. But to this panel, we do a fair amount of build outs and design builds. So we're excited to be here and talk a little bit about more about what's going on. And I've been in the industry for 16 years now, so feels like home.
Perfect. Thank you for that, Carol. Looks like your words were the magic touch to get our cameras to work. Let's move over to Danielle.
Good morning. My name is Danielle Thompson. I am the founding partner of St. Marie Law, LLC. And my primary focus is commercial real estate, representing clients in buying and selling real estate, leasing from both the landlord-tenant side. And I have been involved in a variety of development as well, and different clients who want to engage in some expansion of their buildings and projects with either a standalone building or with a group of tenants. Another area that I also focus on is outside general counsel work for companies who may need some general advisement internally, or if they're buying and selling as well, I will come in and help advise them and set that up for the process to begin. So thanks for having me today.
Thank you. And Danielle's a basketball fan. We got to go to an amazing game together with Carol. And last but not least, James.
Hello, James Van Buskirk here. Oh, there we go. Anyways, sorry. I'm with M3 Insurance here in Madison, and we do property and casualty. We do employee benefits, personal lines, financial services, some financial services. I work in property and casualty, specifically pretty closely aligned with our construction real estate team.
Perfect. The lease, our financier.
I'm Elise Smith-Back. I'm with Park Bank. We are a local community bank with a focus on Dane County. And I help clients out with anything from C&I lending, real estate lending, tenant build-out loans, SBA loans, anything on the lending side and general business banking. And I've been doing banking for over 22 years. I'm excited to talk about a variety of topics with inflation with these folks. We've got a great panel here and should be a good discussion.
Thanks, Elise. We kind of were talking about it, before our event. We thought maybe it would be a great way to start off. Our topic is inflation. James had a great way of just kind of making sure we all have a clear understanding of what inflation is. It's not always bad. So I think we hand it over to you and let's talk a little about inflation.
Sounds good. I'll caveat it with I'm not an expert. I'm not an economist. I have some education in this, but I thought it'd be nice to just have just sort of a baseline so that we all understand exactly, at least starting from the same page here, as to what is inflation. Obviously, we hear about it everywhere all the time now, particularly. But at the most basic fundamental idea is that it's just a general increase in prices and a fall in the purchasing value or the purchasing power of money. And that is very elementary, right? Or rudimentary, really. But how that happens is, I think, important to understand, because this isn't, I don't think, a surprise to anyone that inflation is a word that's being thrown around. And again, this is going to be kind of Econ 101, but just to provide sort of a base level for us all to go from or understand from, is that you get inflation because the supply of something goes way up. In this case, we're talking about dollars, of course, and the demand remains relatively unchanged. And we know that the problem, where this problem stems from, is that supply has gone up. Obviously, then was contributing to this is the 2020 stimulus bill, where we pumped $5 trillion into the economy. And the ripple effect from that is that the markets for things like materials or inputs, they're unable to keep up with the new increased demand that's been created by either inexpensive capital with low interest rates, or the cash that is being so freely given out. So when money comes in, this is kind of how we get to it, and the pieces that I think are going to be interesting for a lot of people to talk about, namely getting into like interest rates and the relative purchasing power of the dollar. When money comes in, there's two choices: you either spend it or you save it. Spending money goes into the economy, it changes hands over and over. It's called the velocity of money. We're getting out of 101 now. So, and that is slowing down, and that's concerning to have a stagnant dollar. But the saving is the other option of what you do with the money, right? The dollar comes in, it's either spent or it's saved, or a portion of it is spent, a portion of it is saved.
Invest.
What's that? Oh, yeah. Well,
Or
that's
invest. Very
that's what I'm going to
important.
get to. I'm going to get to that in a second. So the incentive for saving money is interest rates. So when you've got really low interest rates, what you find is a lot of people borrowing because it's relatively inexpensive to borrow, which is pumping more cash into the economy. When you have less savings, so the incentive for saving is interest rates. So in order to increase savings, you have to increase interest rates, and that's the sort of the crux of the problem, right? Is how do you do that in a way without sending everything completely out of whack? So it's an interesting period to be at with that, and watching, certainly people smarter than me having to figure out how to balance and how do you raise interest rates in a way that doesn't send everything, into a tailspin. But that's sort of a very quick and dirty way of explaining inflation and what it is that they're talking about, because it's not just that the dollar buys less stuff, right? Which is kind of the most basic understanding of inflation, but what is that going to mean going forward? And I'll let other people jump in as they want to, and I'll give it like a little insurance piece of it later. But
definitely a balancing act, right? It has to be really tricky and strategic about how you balance. inflation. In 2022, February, the Wall Street Journal came out with an article that said commercial real estate was really going to be the area that people should invest heavily in, that was going to yield a higher return than what some of the markets were, as we have inflation that it's not scheduled to go to subside until like Q4. So it'd be that's why we're all partners, right? We're in the commercial real estate world. But then there was also a counterpart to that said inflation is going to be hedged. The strength of commercial real estate due to the pricing being higher, just in overall supply chains, et cetera. I'd be curious to hear from Carol on supply chain because you are in the building area.
And I know it's pretty common knowledge that that's an issue in terms of getting things, which creates difficulty when you're trying to plan a project, because it's not just something where it's, oh, we've got high lumber prices or we've got a shortage of this product or that product. It cuts across a broad array of areas. I mean, everything from getting your windows to getting trusses to getting certain cabinets, cupboards. I mean, you name it. It's a challenge to get those things when you're trying to plan a project. That can be an issue. And then even if the product is available, you don't necessarily have the transportation system that's staffed right now. So the labor shortage kind of plays into the material availability, because if you don't have the truck drivers, I don't know if you saw the article about Walmart was dangling $110,000 salaries for truck drivers because you simply don't have the workforce to unload the shipping containers, then to drive the trains and to drive the trucks. So it's depending on, where your products are coming from. And then you have, with the war in the Ukraine, you've got steel production issues. And so because of what's happening with China and Russia, and there's just so many different things that are playing into it. I kind of joke, you've got like the boomers, and then you've got, Gen X and millennials and Gen Z. And I'm like, this next generation should be the Murphy babies, because if it could go wrong, it's going to go wrong. I mean, everything from the Suez Canal blockage to the Texas freeze, which with the fuel production to Louisiana power grid. I mean, it's, you name it. If something can go haywire, it's gone haywire, and trying to fixing. So it's a challenge. It's not insurmountable, but it's certainly, if you're someone who's thinking about starting a project or doing a build out or doing whatever it is that you're going to do, you really are going to have to think a little bit differently than you might have if you were starting a project 5 years ago.
And actually, just jumping in on that, Carol, from the brokerage aspect, leasing in particular, like, for example, I'm working with a client in downtown Madison. We've got a couple offers in, and looking at the construction budget, of course, it's a much larger number than typical for a full kitchen build out. And instead of a standard approximately 4 months, we're seeing 7 to 8, which, as you know, is standard now. So just kind of highlighting one of those examples that you touched on, Carol, it's really rippling out. I mean, if you think about it, that's twice the amount of lead time. So people are really trying to buy second gen restaurants. They're waiting. I'd say they're a little more strategic due to the pricing, due to the lead times. And then of course, here in the downtown, of how do they time it so that their doors open when the students return in the fall, or if they're able to get in more quickly. So a lot of different factors. And similarly to the logistics that you mentioned, Carol, staffing. That's where, in talking with some of the different operators, whether it's local, regional, national, it's a staffing concern. And that's where they're also shifting from some of the standard brick and mortar to the drive-through locations, or for sure a pickup window. People don't want to get burned like they did the past couple of years. And so they're really creating that buffer through concept and also orientation to adjust for it.
I'm curious to hear what Danielle has to say around like the legal part of some of those leases and stuff that are being a little more, because they probably have a projected open time frame. If that's getting pushed out, how does that legally affect them, Danielle?
I've had the issues surrounding that have been interesting because there's been more contingencies in leases than there have in the past. Generally, it is not the commencement date is no longer a set date. It is contingent upon so many things. It's contingent upon all of the build outs being completed, which have been extending longer. It's contingent on and the finance people can allude to this a little bit more, but some of the SBA financing is taking a little bit longer. And so a lot of these leases have been contingent. And then the force majeure clauses have been expanded significantly to include a whole host of things. More than the reason I think that's important is that it hasn't been necessarily just landlord focused. It is also, they've been very thoughtful on tenants who are doing these build outs to account for supply issues and things that way. I appreciate that they've been not one-sided. So, but the force majeure and the commencement dates have been pretty open-ended.
So I'm hearing before someone signs a traditional lease, they need you to review it.
That would be fantastic. I think that's
Definitely.
absolutely necessary.
Yeah, it's a large investment. I mean, if you think about it too, with leases, if people aren't familiar, they may not understand the value of them. But if you think a lot of them, I work in the range anywhere 500 to about 2.5 million. So if you're not familiar with leasing, you hear that number, you would never guess that leasing, it's a large investment. So you definitely have to have an attorney. And that's why I love referring Danielle, because she does a great job. And I like to call it conscience negotiating, that you never want a deal to be one-sided and cutthroat, even if you could, because what comes around does go around. And at the end of the day, you want to feel good about what you've done. And it really is a long-term partnership, especially, the leases are being signed for 7 years, 10 years, even with everything that's happening. So it's a large investment for people of time and resources.
Curious, Elise, is there any type of creativity that you have to get in from a financing side of these build outs, and what does that look like for you?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I would say it's more on the purchasing side. There's a big push for cash offers out there at this point. So it's getting creative on how we can structure things in a way to allow my clients to access cash to put offers in to, beat out some of the other offers. So I've seen a fair amount of that stuff. Also, real estate prices are just going up. So figuring out ways to be creative on how we can get cash flows to work. And helping them, figure out if, they're really going to overpay for something, or if it's going to be worth something, worth overpaying in the long run. So
are your clients having an issue just maybe here more locally in Madison, finding inventory after you've been creative in all this financing and you're like, okay, now we're ready. There's nothing to buy.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, I see a lot of people, doing home flips. So they're trying to look for that. And that's, finding a house for that is really tough right now. And then, just finding that perfect spot. I would say people looking for really small offices. I've heard there's some trouble finding some really small office space that will work. And then, the shorter closing timelines too, for sure. Offers getting more competitive. So trying to get that stuff done in a quicker manner than normal.
Well, because we're afraid of the rate being risen by the Fed again on that aspect too, right?
Yeah. And then rates are going up. So, it wasn't a slow, in my opinion, not a slow gradual increase. It was, one day in the 3s and now we're in the 4s.
Right. I would agree.
Can I jump in real quick for a question for you? As you're seeing these prices continue to rise and climb, is there ever a thought that appraisals are running into issues, or do these properties continue to appraise out as the prices skyrocket?
Yeah, we have had luck with appraisals. I do have a deal right now that I'm interested if it'll appraise out. So we'll see how that one is. But as of right now, yes. But I have seen a couple of projects in the last, 60 days or so come back for additional dollars or increasing loan amounts because of rising construction costs. So that's been pretty common.
Well, and jumping in on that, Elise, too, from the brokerage end, I completed a deal recently where we tied it in with the appraisal within, a 20% difference, just because it is such a tight market that, that's where each of us, and this is what I love about our Pivotal Partners group, is that it's really creating that strong team and pulling from, the best lending, attorneys, construction, all of the different arenas, so that each entity has to get creative, bringing it through. which does get the deal across the finish line. Because if you're slow, if you're indecisive, and if you don't have your lending lined up or cash, you're out of the game. And that's where, especially in our market being smaller, it's very relationship based. And that's where the properties that are not yet on the market, that's where I am making those calls to different people, and you tell your clients first because it's a value add for them. And so relationships are really important, whether it's business and otherwise.
I can actually, to that point, we had multiple clients where the first time around that we're working with them, we weren't brought in right away. We just kind of got inserted into that process. And in one case, we went through and it was a renovation. And it was one of those things where we were told, we're going to get these materials on this date and these materials on this date. And of course, then literally you'll show up at the job site and you'll get a call saying, oh, it's going to be a couple more weeks, which is really difficult when you're trying to do schedules. But the thing is, we worked with those clients and we're able to kind of like help shoulder some of that pain, work through that process together and adjust things so that it still worked out and we got the work underway. But now they have more projects upcoming, and it's a lot easier now to convince people to be like, okay, remember how we went through that? This is why we should be here now. And let's start talking about pre-ordering, building in escalation clauses, making sure that we account for all of this so that there aren't any unpleasant surprises for any of us. And although it's kind of funny on the flip side of it, there's also been situations where a product isn't supposed to come in until, 6 weeks out, and all of a sudden it just shows up. And then you have to make sure that what if it shows up 6 weeks early as opposed to 6 weeks late, which is also a thing that you make sure there's some, because if you can't store it on site due to weather, due to space, or whatever the case may be, like that you're it's almost the prepare for anything sort of scenario. But the sooner you start working, and 90% of our work is done design build. So we work with people right out of the gates, and that transparency and that, ability to build that in right away helps you be able to work together in a more effective manner with all of these different things that are happening.
Curious, from a risk mitigation standpoint, James, is there any differences in like the underwriting of insurance or any additional insurances to help protect some of these companies?
Depending on what you're looking to do, they're the right insurance for anything, right? But as far as what is a valuable way to mitigate that risk, I think, through the lens of inflation, with the whole basis being that a dollar down the road is probably not going to get you the same as it is going to get you today. Is like Heather alluded to at the beginning, with investment today in a long-term asset that's going to ride out through whatever lows and high, whatever dip was coming. However, I won't say severe, but whatever the economic dip that's coming up looks like, your long-term assets that are just going to gain value over time, and maybe real estate doesn't continue like this, but maybe it goes like that. We know that over time it's going to appreciate. And so personally, I think that taking that dollar today and putting it in a long-term asset that is going to appreciate no matter what this little dip looks like, strategically makes sense in my mind. And from a cash flow perspective, take the cash that you have now and offload, or I guess it would be take care of whatever like recurring kind of bills maybe are coming up, right? So from an insurance perspective, it's like, if I'm on quarterly payments for my insurance, if I could just take it today and just get rid of it, I know that I'm going to need to have that $10,000 next quarter a little more available. Anything more that I can have available down the road, I want to make sure it's there, because I'm not going to get as much for it. If that makes sense. So as far as risk mitigation for project delays and things like that, it's fortunately everybody's pretty respectful, I think, from what I've seen. Everybody just kind of understands that. I'm working with a contractor right now in my basement, and our floor was delayed a month. So I'm not going to hold anybody's feet to the fire for my my flooring, but it just kind of happens, and we all know that it happens. So I think that there's a lot of pieces that contribute to it. I think from an insurance perspective also, generally insurance is going to move with the market. So if there's inflation, I mean, we build in to just about every single building that's insured has got some kind of inflation guard on it. And, typically that's set at, 4%, or, no one was looking at 6 or 8%, but sometimes carriers now are looking and saying, this $10 million building, we're going to put an 8% inflation guard on it, so that as the cost of materials, as the cost of labor, all of these inputs that generate insurance premium, and what that cost is then to the customer, the consumer, the insurance companies are going to move right there with it. So
do you think it's more under scope right now, or is that just kind of standard business practice because of some of like the long-term, being in business and seeing the markets fluctuate?
Yeah, it's a little more sophisticated than the price of steel is spiking, right? And so the cost of insurance, anything related to steel, is going to go way through the roof. It's more sophisticated than that, and a little more of a long range than just weathering these ups and downs. But the trajectory will be along the same lines, probably up and to the right.
Got it. So we've talked about a lot of different hurdles and a lot of different areas that we're all trying to overcome and how we have to be creative of it. But just 4 days ago, CBRE reported the highest occupancy levels since COVID. We know that is greatly in part due to Heather leasing everything. but what are some of your thoughts around, all of these hurdles? And is it just us being creative and helping clients and working together? Or what do you think is driving all of this leasing?
Well, I'll jump in on that. I think a lot of it is understanding what's happening in the marketplace, both here within Wisconsin and then beyond. And then it's also really educating your clients. And I think that's really important, because if they don't understand what's happening, how can you truly help them and also align it to their greatest desires? When I look at the leases as well, a lot of times it wasn't tight to CPI in Madison. And now if you're not tying it in and inserting some type of floor and ceiling on that number, you're really going to hurt your landlords. And again, since these deals are a minimum of 5, a lot of them are significantly longer, that's going to have ramifications for years to come. So it's really important to stay up to date on it, and also make sure that you're putting the language in. And then that's the nice thing also of handing it off to Danielle, of making sure that all of the legalese is provided. And then also from her knowledge of the arena, people get a really concise lease, which is what's important. So I would say a lot of it is knowledge, and then understanding your client, what are their top 2 priorities, maybe 3, and providing them with the knowledge so that they can make a good investment through you.
Anyone else have thoughts?
I just to build off Heather, I think she makes a very good point, because people are taking on so much more risk as they go through these processes. So it's important for them to understand that their paperwork and documents are in line with one another, because they're going to be expected to give in a lot of areas and take on a little more risk, obviously insurance is very important in that element as well. But so I think people have to be very thoughtful of their provisions that they're actually putting in, to make sure it addresses their key points. Because if they want to be competitive, they have to move fast and make some pretty quick decisions. So I think it's important to have the group involved to make sure that you do cover all your bases and don't over leverage yourself, have proper insurance, have the right space for the right price over the right amount of time. It all ties together, and obviously the build out, I don't want to exclude Carol. So it's all very important. So, but again, people have to move very fast. And so they do need to be very thoughtful of some of the key items.
But I would kind of play off that, but going a little off topic with one thing that's consistent across that is more information equals less surprises. So for, I'll get people that'll hand me just a picture of a building or just a existing floor plan and be like, how much would this cost to do a build out? And you're like, I don't know, how much does a car cost? It could, be $20,000. It could be $200,000. It really depends on what are the materials that you want used and or how long will this take? I don't know. What are the specifics you want? So the sooner you can really get into that, having accurate and complete design information. And if you can also, it's a great time to start working with your contractor and with your, financial institution and all of the players involved to be like, okay, let's work this through together, because then we can tell you it's a lot easier for us if we have complete design information, or at least a really strong sense of it or your vision, then we can give you, price in the moment and then say, but with realistic expectation that what we're saying today might change, but here's what we anticipate based on what we're seeing. And here's some realistic lead time for what you're going to have. So the more information, the less you'll be unpleasantly surprised. So
from a financing perspective, at least does it twist your brain a little bit on how you have to quickly finance something, knowing, maybe if it's going SBA, that's going to take longer. But from Danielle's point, she's like, we got to go now. From Carol's point, if you got to pay for it, we got to pay now. How does that work for you?
It's tricky, and it's all just a balancing act, and every situation is different. So I would say we can generally be flexible until it comes to the SBA.
Right.
The SBA doesn't really allow us to be super flexible, but again, just trying to find different creative ways to come up with how to make all of that work. And we have been. I had just a small dental practice do a build out not too long ago, and we moved things along quickly so they could put their down payment down. So then the contractor could then order the materials. So again, it's open lines of communication and just being able to react quickly, which we, Park Bank and myself, have been able to do.
That's good to hear. Curious, what is the leasing environment like? Maybe more like in Madison, Heather, because you're more here. But our rental leases, are they going up and stabilizing, or are they kind of staying where they historically have been in the downtown area, especially with like some of the government grant programs driving people to lease back downtown?
Yeah, so as far as leasing throughout the downtown, I would say it's been stable. It does have the second highest rents within Dane County outside of Hilldale Shopping Center, which is owned by WS Development. And so with that, one of the intriguing things about investing in State Street is that the rents are stable. So you may not always have the highest returns, but that stability is obviously very enticing to investors, which is why you don't see many of them turning over. And when someone is actually selling a property, again, a lot of it is through the relationships, and it's sold before it hits the market frequently. Every once in a while, there will be one on the market. So just again, to really hone in on the importance of relationships and also having your numbers together and understanding what type of investment is lucrative to you. So as we extend outside of the downtown, Dane County in general has done pretty well. I do have some listings in Fitchburg as well as Waunakee, and a lot of the leases have been with a lot of local as well as regional and some credit tenants too. So there's a common misconception that the local operators aren't expanding, but they are, and they're creating great spaces for people to experience and expand. So I really do like that, but bringing it back home to the downtown as well, the grants that you mentioned, very advantageous. For example, there's a $10,000 grant through WEDC for the state, and that's anywhere within the state of Wisconsin. You need to have a lease signed by the end of June, and I would suggest anyone to go and visit their website for that. I do have a post for that on my Heather Ewing LinkedIn page as well. But throughout also in the downtown, what's nice is that the city is looking into creating a TID district. And that will, again, provide additional funds. Core Spaces is building out their 10-story development on the 300 block. So I see that as a positive. It's going to create an influx of additional pedestrians in that area, because the top has always been, if you want to say, busier, as well as the 500 and 600 block. Two different demographics, but adding Core Spaces in the middle will be a nice addition for the street. And then also there is the Lake Street parking garage, which that will tie in with the TID as well. So to your point, Darcy, there are grants. There's the ARPA grant, which is focused on economic development towards small businesses. So there are a lot of opportunities. Again, it's having those relationships, working with someone that really understands the market, and that allows you to learn about some of these additional resources, because, you know, if you can save 10, 20, 50,000, that's a firm yes in my book.
That's a good point.
Yep.
Utilities, are you seeing like utility kind of costs go up in any of the rental areas, or in excuse me, landlords, are they including them, or is that still a standalone?
It's always so the leases are standard triple net, so all pass through, and then utilities are always paid by the tenant. Where you see that different is maybe a one up, you know, someone that might be older, has one property. Unfortunately too, they don't know market rents. You don't see escalators. So when you think about it from the investment standpoint as well, they're leaving a lot of money on the table, which is hard to see. And at the same time, I think there just hasn't been an interest level, or maybe they don't know who to work with and things of that nature. So it's really finding the right person in each of the different categories: brokerage, legal, construction, lending, insurance, to understand that. And also a real quick plug for tax. So tax segregation, huge topic. I would have loved to have had Yona Weiss on here. I'll have him join us on another week. He's the king of tax segregation. He actually makes it interesting. So I can't say enough about him. Very gifted guy, great to work with. And if you look him up, Yona Weiss on LinkedIn, you'll see he's got a great following and just really cares about people and brings a lot of knowledge and information and puts that in your hands, which is important.
I'm curious from Carol, as we're looking at all these different developments that Freedy is involved in, you are involved in, are you seeing more standalone brick and mortar developments, or more residential, commercial, multifamily type of units?
We are doing a fair number of what I would kind of call it the smaller developments in your, you know, business and industrial parks around the ring of Madison. I mean, we've got a number of projects that we have going right now that are kind of owner occupied, you know, they're a heating company, or they're a towing company, or they're, you know, like those kind of businesses are seeming to continue to move forward, even with the challenges that are there, and our build outs are going gangbusters. So we have a ton of work in that. We have been pricing a number of different hospitality, hotels even, and multifamily. What I've seen, I mean, and if you look at Dane County, obviously multifamily is going gangbusters. And I was talking to someone this week at a meeting who said, you know, we have over 3,000 units of apartments that are either recently built or in the pipeline. Now, I don't know if everything that's because I have also seen projects where we come in and, you know, there's several different contractors and all of our numbers are really close, but the project still doesn't pencil out, you know, for that development right now. They're not dead, but they're going on kind of a back burner sort of thing. But obviously, if you look around the city and you see the cranes, there's a lot of that multifamily that's still going up, but there's also a lot that's approved that it'll be interesting to see if that actually goes through, because I see a little bit of a hesitancy, particularly if someone doesn't have to do it, if they have the wherewithal to sit back and kind of see if the inflation and will slow down some of that demand and bring down some of the prices a little bit. So that's kind of, it's a mixed bag. I think you'll still see a lot of it go forward. We are also, interestingly, because of the backlog of we don't usually do a ton of residential, like standalone residential, but we've had people, because there's still a big backlog of the higher end residential. So we've got a number of those homes that are going right now. So again, kind of those standalone in the business park or industrial park. And as long as you have the lead time to plan for it, you know, we do a lot of pre-engineered metal buildings, and you just have to plan because it's one of those with the long lead time as well. But so it's kind of a mixed bag. We're seeing a lot of things still move forward, but we're also seeing some pull back and wait and see.
Got it. And at least curious, the pre-engineered standalone buildings, are those different on how you finance and approach that? And does the shortage of steel or the cost of steel kind of impact your underwriting process for clients who are interested?
Yeah, no, we haven't run into that. I can't say that I've financed a building like that in the last couple of months, but generally speaking, no, we don't look at those any differently.
What about from an insurance standpoint?
Oh yeah. I mean, from an underwriting standpoint, not really. I mean, it's not like a non-combustible metal building is going to be frowned upon. Insurance companies love that stuff. It's the wood frame that is, campus style, apartments get a little interesting. There's definitely markets available for it, but I think what we've seen is most carriers kind of tighten up in that area. So there'll be different underwriting sort of guidelines, but certainly nothing that's going to exclude any type of coverage.
Danielle, what about from like a legal standpoint? If you were going to be leasing a building like that or building a building like that, is it different than traditional sticking?
I haven't seen any differences. I just there's so much growth and expansion. I guess from that standpoint, whether it's brick and mortar or metal or whatever, what I've been noticing is just a lot of, not to change directions, but a lot of 1031s where it really doesn't matter. People are really moving really fast through that right now. It's been a big part of projects that I've been working on where people are unloading certain ones, buying bigger and moving on. And, they're a little less restrictive on how many years are left on leases. And it might be a 2-year lease left and they're still jumping and plunging in to hope for the best and, have some advanced discussions, but moving forward on, and I've noticed both types of properties are expanding. If they're in a good market and they're in a good location, they're growing and they're just going to be expanding their building no matter what it looks like. So it's been pretty constant.
Got it. Heather, you stay pretty plugged in nationally, from leasing to everything. What are you seeing nationally in comparison to Madison? Are we growing just as fast, or are we a little bit behind the ball, or what does that look like?
We're expanding quickly, which is great. So I would say the Midwest, Madison is out ahead a bit. But, when you do look at that national coverage too, a lot of people are really focusing on multifamily. That has been a huge asset class, even for the past couple of years. So the nice thing about that, when you compare multifamily to a single residential home, you're really mitigating your risk with that. If you have 100 keys versus one door, if you have a vacancy, it's not a big deal. You can easily absorb it. Great tax opportunities also to, reduce the balance there. So there's a lot of good things happening. Of course, I would say for people to invest in the multifamily, as Danielle and others are saying, the straight up residential is really hot too. So it just depends on your appetite, the amount you have to invest, syndications and all of that. And that could be another pivotal partners meetup and pull some other investors in as well on that. But it's a hot market. We're very fortunate in Dane County.
I don't think people really find themselves confined to areas like they have in the past. I think, at least from what we've seen, is a lot of companies sort of expanding where their operations go, where they may have typically worked in Wisconsin or in the Midwest. They're maybe not necessarily going to the coast, but they're taking on a couple more states, and maybe we're going into Montana and to the Dakotas, and Colorado has always been very popular, but we've seen more expansion, more regionally, I'd say, and I think that that's because opportunity, sort of people are a little more open-minded to where these opportunities are, and the world is a lot smaller than it was 10 years ago, 15 years ago.
Very true. We're driving a lot of tech to the area as well, with like in biotech as well, with the growth of Catalent that came to the area, and they're going to be expanding again, Exact Sciences. I think Madison, Wisconsin is pretty much on par with Silicon Valley and Austin, Texas, as far as the tech growth industry. And we have unicorns here that are like fetch rewards. There's Blue Line Battery that just got over $3 million, and they're all looking to expand in the Wisconsin area. So it's nice to see the money being retained here and where we live and like to eat. And we like to go out and have our cocktails after work, right? We have nice places to do that.
Heather, I got a question for you. And that when you're talking about, the multifamily is a really hot market. You obviously are super amazing at the retail world, but we've seen this trend over the last, 10 years where the city requires all of the multifamily to have that first or second floor retail or commercial space. And in some cases, I live off of a corridor where there's an awful lot of empty storefronts, but the apartment units are full. But this is a topic for another time. There's kind of this starting to be more of a trend with the younger generations that actually also want a brick and mortar presence and do you see that like all of these mixed use buildings that are going up getting filled on those lower levels, or is that still a challenge? Or what are you kind of seeing on those trends, both here and then what you're hearing around the country?
And that's a great question, Carol. And a lot of that, I always say it comes down to the location. So when we are looking Madison centric, if you're in an area where there's a lot of pedestrian traffic, or you have a good amount of parking, you're in a great location. But when you get a little further out from either of those opportunities, that's when it can really be challenging. For example, I leased out retail at one of the bases of a multifamily, and there was no parking outside of street parking. So as you can imagine, it took a little while, and it really reduces the pool of prospects from that scenario, because parking is crucial to retail and restaurants. So anyone that has worked in that arena knows that. And if you don't have ample pedestrian traffic flow, you're really in a bad position. So the nice thing is it took a while, but secured a great credit tenant. The numbers all lined up, actually got asking price, and we were able to make it work for their need for that particular area. So it's not impossible, but it does take longer. And for example, I had another opportunity like that, and I was the fourth broker and got that lease. So it can take a while. And so looking here again, Madison centric, we need to be, I would say, more selective in where that is required, because some areas just don't warrant it. And I think a little conversation or things like that prior would be really helpful. But you do see it all over, and sometimes it's just going to take a while. So if I were an investor, I think it's really selecting the right location, and that's going to define your success easily, or it's going to take a lot of time.
That's why it's important to talk to you.
Exactly. You have to know what's happening on the streets, and also the consumer behavior, if you want to say, and also that of the operators, of what's important to them, so you can create something that will check those boxes.
Some of the older neighborhoods are seeing gentrification happen too, where there's the parking, but it's kind of the neighborhoods evolving into something a little bit newer, which we've seen on the north side of Madison, and you've been pretty heavily involved in that as well.
Right.
But there is
people
parking
just have a hard time seeing the changes. And I think, change can be really challenging for people. And then you had the past couple of years in, and then, they have nostalgic feelings, and they're used to everything being one story. And then when you do add a few, and that's where too, attending the different neighborhood meetings and speaking on behalf of the developers, that they're not even able to build to the height for the city plan due to the strength of the neighborhoods. And so when I look at it, I see that as a loss for us as a city, because as you look further out, they're going to cap out. They're already maxed out at the residential, and then people are going to have to move further away from where they ideally want to be. So in many situations, I am a proponent for the height, because we have to look beyond the next 5 years and look further out, and there's only so much land. And that's where, to everyone's point, that's why, in a lot of these in the downtown, if you don't have cash, you can't play. And it's what it is. It's highly desirable.
But it's tough when you get outside of the downtown area, you get towards like more big box stores, and well, why would I go shop local if I could go to a big box store, which is an interesting hurdle on its own.
Yeah.
What about you, Carol? Any other thoughts around these different
I was
neighborhoods.
just kind of laughing when Heather mentioned the, when you're dealing with neighborhoods and nostalgia and plans, and also one of the very slow to change or move and adapt to what's happening in the market tends to be government regulation and plans and that sort of thing. I can promise you there's not an economic analysis or market analysis done around the zoning that is like we have in Madison, for example. We keep passing special area plans with or without the input of the property owners, and that tells you, and now they are then actually changing the underlying zoning, which can, in some cases create a non-conforming use of your existing building. So there's these other challenges that you should be aware. It can be a positive thing. It can be a really great thing if that zoning, they get it right and it enables you to bring cool things in. But that's something that to be aware of too, as you're putting these projects together, that in addition, we're dealing with the rezoning with the client right now where you're simultaneously, and that's why it's so great to have, good teams, because you're trying to figure out if the uses are going to work with the zoning, if the materials are going to be on time, if you're going to be able to get the financing that's going to be able to support what you're trying to do. But first you have to do the zoning, and then you have to have the neighborhoods. And so it's all of these moving parts, but that's something that, as this is all moving through, don't forget about those planning and zoning and those kind of rules when you're looking at your spaces and your build out and your uses, because that will have a really big impact on what you're able to do with your project.
And I would just jumping in on that, Carol, too. I mean, that's an exclamation point. And that's where, too, what I love about you, and this is something you offer through Freedy, is your extensive work with the city. That is such a value add. And if you take someone that isn't familiar with commercial real estate, they would never think to ask that, right? So it's providing them with the knowledge so that they can make informed decisions for themselves. And that is just, again, a huge plus for anyone that you work with, because it reduces time. And also, if you're not aware, you can spend a lot of money on something that just will not make it through zoning. And that's a waste of hard-earned money for people. And it's unfortunate, but it happens when you work with people that aren't informed.
Well, that my last comment, that I'll be done. But I think one of the most critical things that I would summarize all of this is that when you're dealing with people, it's the relationship building, as Heather said, and be a partner, not a commodity. I don't go and just chase every project that's out there. I want to build relationships and build client base and have that so that you can be true partners and be transparent and authentic and be able to work through these processes together. So that's my parting comment to everyone.
I would just build on that to say, I appreciate those comments, because what terrifies me most is getting documents and LOIs that all say as is. And I think that can be a little daunting for some people, because if they don't understand what's all going to go into it to get done what they want, they really, really have to have that background knowledge between Carol and Heather to make sure that that's actually a feasible option for them. So a lot of waivers, a lot of as-is clauses, those are things that you need to be wary of, and have the idea of your use is actually going to be a possibility going forward.
I was going to call Carol a zoning master, so you said it very much more eloquently, Heather. that is definitely a value add. Yeah, even in our residential market, we're seeing a lot of as-is listings, and that is just terrifying to me. But people are going and cash offers on as-is, where like, you don't know what that foundation looked like. I can see the water damage.
Writing 20 offers per property, writing 50 grand more than the asking price. It can be scary if you don't know what you're getting into.
It's nice to have
which is terrifying from an insurance perspective.
also,
There's that.
I'll just harp on the more information is better. And I think this is true with all of us, is that we can take the pieces that are there. We know what we're looking for. And the more information that we can work with, the better. Not all of it might be relevant, but we don't want to miss anything that's going to be instrumental in, particularly in getting coverages or underwriting, whether it's insurance underwriting, financial underwriting, whatever, making sure that process, that there's less surprises particularly with how volatile and easily passed up some of these deals are. You know, as soon as you hit one little bump, you know, it's on to the next one, and they've got 5 more people in line or more. So I think that we all make that very important in our work, is to make sure that that bump is not coming from me, you know. So more information is better. That's all I got.
Elise, have any thoughts around the zoning issues in your world or the as-isms? How does that
Well,
affect
I
you?
think I agree with everybody. What everybody else has said is that the as-is stuff can be scary. Hopefully, what I'd say to that is just that you have a team that can help you through any of those challenges that you may come about, or that hopefully you're knowing what you're getting into before you write an offer like that.
Great words. We've got about 2 minutes left. Does anyone have any like closing thoughts or comments that we want to end our discussion today with?
I would just say that, you know, to reiterate, kind of like with our prior quarterly webinars, it's really assembling the right team. And that goes off of, like Carol said, transparency, really working with the best in each of the arenas. And you don't know what you don't know. So referrals are always great, and just working closely with your team. It's never a solo endeavor.
I would 100% agree and say that we are all very active on LinkedIn. If anyone wants to connect with us, whether it be legal, leasing, build out, finance, insurance, we're all there to help. And I just want to thank everyone for joining our discussion today. Thank you for all of your valuable inputs as our partners, my partner in our community. Thank you for all you do, and have a great afternoon. And thank you so much for allowing me to moderate the discussion today.
Thank you, Darcy. Thank you,
Yeah.
everyone.
Thanks, Darcy.